My name is Juliana Nykolaiszyn with the Oklahoma State University Library. Today is Tuesday, April 16th, 2013, and I'm in Stillwater, Oklahoma, interviewing Steven McElroy and Patricia McElroy as part of the O State Stories Oral History Project. Thank you so much, both of you, for joining us today. Well, let's begin. First, I'd like to learn a little bit more about you, and then we're going to talk a little bit more about your family connection to OSU. Patricia, could you start off and tell us where you were born and the year you were born, and tell me a little bit about your parents?
Okay. I was born in 1950, August 11th, in Norman, Oklahoma. My parents, at the time, they managed an apartment complex. And my recollection is it was, at that time, right across the street from the OU golf course. So, because the only reason why I know that is because we had golf balls that ended up in the front yards all the time. I don't think my mother worked at the time other than managing out of that office, nor my father. I think he just did maintenance to take care of the buildings. How they got there, I don't know. We moved as a family back here to Stillwater when I was 3 or 4, so that would have been 1953, 54, and moved into a house about a quarter of a mile from C.H. McElroy's house. And so I could walk, as I got older, could walk to their house, and often did ride my bike there. So when we moved, my mother got a job at the university. Do you want me to go into it? Her first job was in animal husbandry in that beautiful building. She worked for, and I can't tell you the professor, but he was in charge of Herefords, so it was cows. So she got really good at knowing about cows. Then she transferred to the dairy department and was still with cows, but they were doing different things. And then finally, she ended up at the athletic department, which is where she retired from. First as the secretary for the football coach and the assistant athletic director, and then she retired as administrative assistant to the athletic director for OSU. My father, when they moved here, I assume has had this job, same job all of his life here in Stillwater. He was the supervisor for maintenance and grounds, building and grounds, for OSU athletic department. He stayed in that job until he retired. So.
Wow. All right, Steven, if you could tell us the year you were born and a little bit about your parents.
Well, I was born in 1957 in Los Angeles, California. My father, Buell McElroy Jr., was the son of
Buell McElroy Sr.
Buell McElroy Sr., my granddaddy Mac, we always called him. And as a young child, we'd come back to Stillwater to visit. This was, by that time, they were living out McElroy Road out there.
We were out on 6th Street, were we not?
Right.
Yeah, which is the residence I referred to that's like a quarter of a mile from.
And some of my earliest childhood memories were with my granddaddy Mac coming down to the campus at night. For some reason, he had to come down on business. And like I was telling Pam, he had this keychain that seemed like it had 1,000 keys on it, and it would be dark in the buildings. You'd have a little flashlight, he'd show me how he had these different rings in between the sets of keys, and that's how he could tell at night which key set he was using to get in the different doors. Just had really fascinating and wonderful memories of my granddaddy Mac.
So go back to your father.
My father, I guess he was very close with Dean Mac. Apparently he spent some time being raised by his grandmother and grandfather. And I remember visiting as a child CH's house, and we always called him CH, and he was just a very tall, very formidable man to me, very, very quiet spoken. And as a 5-year-old kid, that's mostly what I remember about him. I do remember when he passed we decided it was 1970, that my father was very, very affected by that. He wasn't talking about it. He didn't talk much about his feelings. And I remember he flew back for the funeral, and it was a very somber time in our family's life. So.
Your mother?
My mother and my father met while they were going to school here, as I understand. And they moved to California about 2 years before I was born. My older brother is 2 years older than me, and he was born in Oklahoma, so yeah, love my mom. She did a real good job raising us kids for many years, and in her later years lived out her dream, moved to Napa, into the house that I'm living now on Main Street, and became the artist. Just did artwork for the rest of her life, and that was always her dream. So good for you, Mom.
Well, we're sitting here today in McElroy Hall here at the OSU Veterinary Medicine School, and let's talk a little bit about what you remember or what you can recall about Dean McElroy.
Well, I spent a lot of, I guess they babysat me often. And because, I grew up with parents that both worked, which back in that time I think was rare. When I look back on it and look at my friends, most of them, their mothers did not work. My father had a much more relaxed job, I guess you'd say. So he seemed like he could get off at any time. So he would get off and pick me up from work. And so during the week, most of the time I would spend it at home. But on the weekends, sometimes I would go to my grandparents. And Granddaddy had a fairly large piece of property on 6th Street. I couldn't tell you how many acres, but it was acreage. And he had a farm. He had pigs. He had chickens. He had, eventually I got a couple of horses, and so those horses stayed there some time. One of my fondest memories was when the pig was pregnant, and I would get a phone call, say, okay, come, it's time. And so, begrudgingly, my father would drive me down, and so I would watch as the piglets were born. And of course I loved all of that, and it was great fun. And of course my grandfather, in the process, I'm sure taught me a lot about that process and how it worked and what happens. And of course, the tragedy with, as you're growing up, you learn kind of the I guess, lessons of life. Because when a sow, as big as they are, when they want to lay down, they can't stop themselves. So there were many piglets that ended up under the mom. And so that was part of, what I learned. And, as much as that was, oh, no, that's so sad. I remember my grandfather explaining, that's just what happens. Of course, they have lots of piglets. So I don't know if that's part of nature's way of making sure that they maintain the herd by having so many. I also remembered he would go out and feed the chickens. And of course, I never was great on putting my hand in a nest with a chicken laying to get eggs. We always had fresh eggs. That was one thing. I did help him, especially in the summer, clean the eggs, kind of, how I did this I don't remember, kind of figure out whether it was a large egg or whether it was a medium egg and all that grade A, double A kind of thing. And we had to do that. And then we would take the eggs in cartons to a store that I think it was on Knobloch, but I'm not sure. Not there anymore. And he would sell his eggs there. So people would buy Dean Mac's fresh chicken eggs. The interesting thing, I remember one time when I was little, I had, I think when kids are little, they wear tennis shoes of different colors. I think we've gotten more sophisticated now, and it's going to be white, or they have little sparklies on them. Well, I had red tennis shoes on one day, and I must have been 5 or 6. And it was a sunny day. I remember that. My grandfather was out spraying feed out for the chickens to come out into the yard to eat. Well, the chickens, instead of going toward the feed, started coming toward me. And they were doing it aggressively, but they were definitely deliberately coming. And I was just standing there and watching my grandfather in the distance. And then he said, "Get out of the yard." I went, okay. And so there was a gate right behind me. It was right by the garage. And so I got out of the yard. Well, he informed me, as the vet he was, that the chickens, who are basically colorblind, have learned that red for them is blood, and so they were coming after fresh meat. They didn't care about the feed that was down there. This was more enticing. So, man, I took a hike. So it was one of my lessons was don't wear red around chickens. So, never did.
Cute.
Again. So I did wear red when I was younger. As I got older, I learned not to. But I do remember that. It was like, oh, okay. The other thing, he had a pond on that property, and every once in a while they'd stock it. And he and I would go fishing, and he kept cane poles in the garage, and the garage had open beams, and so they would stick the cane pole, because they were long, very long, and he would keep them up there. And so I'd come over, and we'd go down to the pond and fish. He had his cane pole, I had my cane pole, and we would fish. Also, he had a large garden, and he loved to plant corn and green beans. Grandmother used to sit there and and peas, pop them out. I could see her on the back stoop with a bowl, pop those in there. And in the whole family, my father had a sister, and she had 2 sons who are still living. And when she got married, she became a Blankenship. So her first name was Geraldine. So all the women, so my grandmother and my mother and my aunt, the women folk, would be in the kitchen. And then my grandfather and I would be out in the garden pulling the ears of corn. We would take it to my father, who was sitting on the edge of his truck on the front yard, and he would peel off the silks and take the worms out, because that was the other thing that you had in corn. And then they would go inside and they'd get blanched. So it was a whole thing that we did every season. And then after everything was done, they would divvy it up and put them in plastic bags, and the whole family would take the corn to various houses. But I remember doing that faithfully every season with my grandfather, getting that corn. the other neat thing, he had a strawberry patch that was on a path of a sidewalk that led from the back door to the garage. And it was, the way it was planted, it was in a round thing, and then right in the middle it was empty. And as a little child, I would get the hose, I'd sit in the middle, and I would wash off the strawberries and eat them. Sit right there. So I guess it was my strawberry patch. So that was,
The strawberries would get water.
yeah, very memorable. At least I knew to wash them. But those were some really cool things that I used to do. Granddaddy also was pretty up with the politics of the city.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think he may have run for something, but I don't really remember. But he would meet a bunch of guys that were also, pillars of the city. At there's a local cafe down on Main Street. And I'm not real sure what I did. I just, that's not a recollection I remember. But he would go to coffee, morning coffee. And that was a very common thing. He would do it during the week too, but if I was in school, obviously I went with him. But on the weekends, Saturdays, I remember getting in the big black car, which was a Ford. They both had matching Ford cars. And getting in that car, and we would go down to that cafe, and I would sit there, and they would talk. I have no idea what they're talking about. And I would have my little coffee or milk or whatever. But I did that a lot with him. That was a very common exercise for the two of us to do.
Would you have chores when you would visit?
No, I was, it's still the same about going to grandparents,
Eating
no.
strawberries.
No. I mean, I remember I would get a Coke. They had the short little Cokes. I would be allowed to go to the refrigerator and get a Coke. But I do remember the big thing was doing I guess the chores in a way were doing the eggs and that kind of stuff, and that was pretty ongoing.
Mm-hmm.
I would help feed the pigs, but Granddaddy was right there. I really don't ever remember doing it on my own. I do remember it was neat because he had a barn, and he had a feed room, and it was a pretty sturdy door that had that feed in it. He'd open the door, and you could smell. And I know smells are a real important thing for memories. And he'd have these bins, and the bins had different feed in it for the different animals. And that would hit you. It was a wonderful smell. And I would go down to the mill, which obviously is still present, and help him get feed sometimes. And my grandmother, and that was back, I don't know what the feed comes in now, but they came in cotton, bags. My grandmother would take those and make pillowcases and stuff, and I still have some of that. And she would embroider, make them fancier. And she would do that often. And so we've got dish towels and some, well, mostly dish towels that were made out of those old feed sacks because they were good material. But I do remember going down to the feed store, to the mill and getting feed. So there were different things, just depended on what time of year it was and what he needed, and we would go. So I did do a lot of that. And I did go on vacation with him a couple of times, just he and I, when I was older. And we took a train to Kansas City, I think. First time I ever was on a train. That was cool. So those are the recollections. He didn't take me too much to school, mm-hmm. To the university. Now, he did my father. There are stories about him taking my father. I think my father spent a lot more time, obviously. I wasn't around. At his work. And I know my father saw some pretty gross, gruesome things that were just part of the learning process at the vet school. I think they used to do experiments on chickens. So my father would not eat chicken. He wouldn't eat turkey either. I think that was just a transfer. I don't think they were working on turkeys. It took a long time for my mother to finally convince my father that it really is okay. You can eat this. So she used to sneak it in
Wow.
in a dish. He
Interesting.
wouldn't know what it was. He wouldn't eat it. He would not eat chicken or turkey. So when he'd go to these banquets and stuff, which he didn't do often, but inevitably, they would have chicken on the menu. We didn't have the selections we have now, so he wouldn't eat it. So, but yeah.
Any more remembrances of your grandmother? What did she do? Did she have an occupation?
Well, that's interesting. The book of this.
The
There's
history.
a picture of her in the book right here.
This one.
Maggie.
It kind of reminded me of what a military wife, if the military guy was the head of the unit for the military, the wives would get together. Well, that's what they did. So I think that's what my grandmother did. Because he, first he was the dean of the vet school, and then he became dean of men, and so he got more involved at a higher level with more involvement with the university. And so I think her role greatly was deal with the wives of whomever, and I think she did a lot of that. I only saw her at home. We never really did much together other than at home. So I was just a little kid that was running around the house.
How old were you when he passed away?
I was a sophomore in college. It was midterms. I remember that. He'd been sick in the hospital for a little while. And my sophomore year was not a wonderful year. And, you're taking all of those courses that you have to take that you really don't care about, but you have to take them. But they're not my major, I finally got into my major, which was a much better world for me. And so you're taking all those courses like, the big classes of history where everybody doesn't know your name and that kind of stuff. And when he died, they closed the university for the day, which I was just floored about. I mean, no classes were held that day, and which was a pretty impressive thing from my standpoint. And my friends kept saying, you need to call your professors and see if you can get extensions on your tests. And I took some of them, but I did finally call a couple of them, and they said, well, I've been waiting for you to call, which I thought was very nice of them. I said, well, could I have it in a couple of days before, well, certainly. So it wasn't like, I certainly wasn't lying about why I needed the extension. It was all over the place. The Daily Oklahoman had a big spiel, and it was on the news. It was a pretty big deal. And I guess you realize that when this happens, how much of a big deal he was. It was like, whoa. So yeah, I was here. And it was a pretty big deal, to say the least.
Well, Steven, let's talk about some of your memories as a little boy.
Sure. Well, it's funny to hear her talk about her grandfather taking her out to collect the eggs and feed the chickens, check on the horses, because you did the same thing with us.
Okay.
On the old ranch.
Okay.
So must have sunk in
It must
because that's
And
one
I
of
was
the
a little
things
bit
I
older,
remember.
so-
Yeah, she was.
Kind of a big sister.
She would take us fishing.
Yeah, because there was a pond.
So all these
across-
things you're talking about, it's like you did the same thing with us kids when we came to visit. So those are really great memories for me. And gosh, there's so much.
And you know what sparked this getting you was when we walked in. I showed him a picture
Yes.
of Max, and Max is
Max McElroy.
Let's see the
is-
relationship. He's a cousin
He's CH's brother's
son, right? So Granddaddy had a brother whose name was Emmett, who stayed in Creek County, which is where they kind of landed. And when you looked at the two of them, he looked very Indian. Black hair, high cheekbones. Mm-hmm. Granddaddy got the Irish Scotch with the red hair and the freckles. But they were definitely brothers. And he ran an old-timey trading post over in Creek County.
You're talking about Emmett.
Emmett. Great place to go when you were a kid. So he had a son, Max, who ended up going to school here and became a vet. And he graduated in 1956. So that's what started this conversation, because he started talking
and
about...
that's where I'd like to interject that we always called him Cousin Max, but he was actually my father's cousin, right?
Yeah. Would make you a second cousin.
Right. But he had a veterinary practice right up on Ventura Boulevard in Thousand Oaks, I think it was, in North Hollywood there. And we loved to visit Cousin Max. He always had a story to tell. He was quite a character. He was a wonderful man. Just when she showed me his photograph here, graduating class 56, you said it was? Well, I was just floored because he's so young looking. But he had his own set of really very interesting stories. Being in that area just below the Hollywood Hills, he was the veterinary for all the stars. I remember one of the last get-togethers our family had, he invited all us McElroys over to his house to, I think it was for Thanksgiving one year. And
not us. We were here.
Yeah,
so it was all the McElroys out in California.
But the California McElroys went out and had Thanksgiving, and Max had so many stories about the Hollywood stars and whatnot. And one of the things I thought was interesting was his story about Marilyn Monroe, who apparently he had an appointment with her to have lunch, I think, the very day she turned up dead. So he seemed to think that was pretty fishy. Anyways, back to McElroy's. You know, I discovered most of my information sort of after the fact when I started getting into genealogy as an adult. I started getting curious about the McElroy name and tried to trace it back. And this is when I discovered all the lineage of CH being part Indian.
Which I already knew.
She already knew all this. I had no idea. And as a child, I can only remember from about the age of 5 on, I just had this love of the country, this love of the land. And joined the Boy Scouts because they would always go camping and be close to nature. And then when I discovered this Indian connection, to me it made sense because I felt like that's the part of my family that drove me to be like that. You know? It's in the blood. So I've always had a very close love of nature and animals. And I think I got that through him. So I attribute a lot of my love of nature and animals to CH because I truly believe that's where I got all that.
Would you come back to Stillwater often?
Yes, we would. I think it sort of tapered off once CH passed on. Yeah. And honestly, I graduated high school in 75, so I was off on my own, finding my own way. Like I said, I knew from an early age that I didn't want to be in the city. I I would use every excuse I could to get out of there. In fact, I would spend summers with my neighbors across the street. Had grandparents up in the Central Valley over in San Joaquin. They had a big orange orchard. Well, that was the country. So they would invite me to come up with them, and I don't know how my parents felt about that, but they let me do it.
Now, I really only recall one time that they came vividly. I mean, I know that they came more often, but I remember his parents going to Oklahoma City to see something. And so my parents babysat all the boys, because he has a younger sister, she wasn't here yet. And we had a tornado that came through. And we had to evacuate to a shelter. And so I remember I have a picture of Bryce asleep. And you're just kind of wide-eyed, like, what's going on? And we ran 2 doors down from the house to a storm shelter and stayed down in there. And I thought, oh, what a night for the parents to be gone and the grandparents having to take care of all the kids. So I do recall that episode of happening.
My grandmother also lived out here, and she ran that hotel.
Right. Not the same grandmother.
This from a different part of the family, my mom's side, and so we would come spend summers here. I think that was over in Norman.
There were several hotels.
It was a hotel that she ran.
Yeah, one of the interesting things with his mother, Yvonne, my sister-in-law. Of course, when I was little, not knowing the terminology, I used to tell the sisters, the teachers, that my brother married my sister. And needless to say, I got a lot of attention. But I didn't quite understand. I since learned, but I caught on. I said, well, I don't understand. Well, that's not possible. But I really, I loved my sister-in-law. And found out when she started going to school, I'm sure you know this, she wanted to go into art because she was a very good artist. And her father wouldn't let her. So she ended up in textile.
Fashion design.
Yeah, fashion design. Which she had a very good eye for. And had, later years, had
boutiques.
Boutiques
she
where
opened
she
her
sold,
own boutiques.
And so she was very good at that. But she always went back to her art. It was a big deal. But he was not going to support her tuition if she went into the art stuff.
Wow.
So
she always wanted
kind of had to compromise
to go to New York and drink coffee and smoke cigarettes, things like that.
Yeah.
But that side of my family got us back to Oklahoma lots of times. As kids, we were always wanting to go to Frontier City and do the fun things, swim in the pool. Let's see. I remember being out here one trip, and this was sort of a traumatic experience because my sister, I know she was 4. She had her 4th birthday here in Norman, I believe it was. And she came down, I don't know, with diabetes.
That's when she got real sick.
It's when she got sick.
Yeah.
And I remember my mother and my sister flying back to Los Angeles to get her in the hospital, and my dad piling my brother and me in his old Corvair. And we beelined it back for California. We didn't even stop at that house first. We went straight to that hospital. But I remember along the way, and this is what I was going to tell you earlier, we had a blowout.
Oh.
And it was fun. It was scary as heck for my dad. And I always remember looking at the tire and thinking, oh, it's shredded wheat. So I was
Shredded.
telling you earlier, I was looking at my tire and noticing it was bald on my motorcycle, and I just, that's where my brain keeps going back to as a child. That blowout. So I'm going to have my tire changed before I leave for California.
That's good because we do not want any shredded wheat
No
on the road.
more shredded wheat, especially with a motorcycle. That's
Well, when you think about your family, talk to me about how you hope your family legacy is viewed here at Oklahoma State.
Well, I will tell you the interesting thing was that I moved away from here after I graduated. Went down to Louisiana and really never. I mean, I came back, but because my parents were still here, but never really otherwise. And I remember I made a donation to the vet school. One of the things, when the OSU callers call.
Mm-hmm.
And so, they always want me to give it to this. And I said, no, I want to give it to the vet school. And so I always do that. And they always have to make sure, change everything they've got in front of them. And so I made a donation. It was not that big, but I got a letter from the dean's office, which I'm sure everybody got a letter from the dean's office. It wasn't anything big. But I looked at it and I went, oh, okay. And then I looked at the return address and it said McElroy Hall. And I went, huh, okay. So I called the number on the letter because it was a letterhead stationery. So I called and got the secretary for the dean, and it was Dean Landis at the time. I'm not sure that's his name. Lorenz, thank you. I was getting the wrong letter. And of course, I'd not met him or anything, but I talked to the secretary and I said, she didn't know who I was. And I said, is this the dean's office? He said, yes. And I said, could you tell me where your office is located? And she said, well, it's in the McElroy Hall building. And I said, could you tell me when that became the McElroy Hall building? So I didn't have a clue. And she says, about 3 years ago. And I went, oh, okay. And then I told her who I was.
Mm-hmm.
And she went, oh. And see, my aunt, my father's sister, lived here and died here. But she had Blankenship as her last name. So they didn't know, I'm sure they just kind of lost that process. And so they didn't know where any of the family was, so I guess they never reached out to try to get any. So I was oblivious to the fact that this building got renamed. So I went, oh, okay. Well, one thing led to another. And so I think we got a hold of the development people from that conversation, and then the thing with the award. And I said, are you people still giving that award out? And yeah. And I said, oh, okay. And so I said, well, why don't I come sometime? And I'll go to the banquet. And so that's what started that.
Mm-hmm.
So I've been doing it maybe the last 6 years or so. Sometimes I've missed because work just wasn't conducive for me to get off for 4 days to come up here. So that was a pleasant surprise. I will tell you the other thing. When I was younger, I got on this kick because McElroy Road has been McElroy Road since before I was born. And I noticed as I got older and a little more savvy to politics that streets run one way in this city and drives run another way. And then you have McElroy Road. And so I started doing some investigating and find out, why is it called road? Why isn't it called a drive like every other street or whatever? And I ended up at the fire station, the head fire station with their maps and everything. Oh, well, can you see it's an extension here? That's fine, but it's not named right, I could never figure it. Go to whoever needed to rename it because I thought it needed to be renamed. It still doesn't make sense to me. But so that was one thing, I tried to do as a little citizen of the town. And that didn't happen. And then as I was growing up, of course, my friends knew, my grandfather, mainly because their parents knew. He was big at the YMCA. He was on the board. And so when I was probably still in junior high, I got a job there. I'm sure he got it for me. And I kind of was a lifeguard, sort of. But I took the baskets and for the people to put their stuff in. And so I spent my couple of summers at the Y. Loved it. I was a little water baby in it. And my grandmother, I remember, started to get sick, like the end of the first summer. And I don't really know. My mother always thought that she had diabetes, but that never came out. But she would like wander, and we'd have to find her. And then she didn't wander far, but it was like she just didn't know where she was. And I do remember that there was in fact, I think I have it. There was a portrait of my grandfather that was at the Y, and I went there to see it or something, and they didn't have it up anymore, and they didn't want to have it up. I said, oh, okay, so they gave it to me. So I said, okay, I'll take that. So I started going around making sure that there were portraits up, they were still up, or nope, So that was the only one that I found, and I do have it at the house. It's not in great condition; it needs to be reframed. So I did that, but a lot of times for me, when people met me, it was like, oh, you're Dean McElroy's grandchild. And so I got that a lot as I was growing up. I kind of, felt bad for my father because I never was his daughter. I was more my grandfather's grandchild. So, as you grow up, So one of the reasons why I kind of left home for a little while, I went to school down in Dallas, was to get away from that. And I don't know if that's, I would think that sometimes it's common. I just didn't want to be anybody's anything.
Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to be me. And it wasn't a bad thing to be who I was, but it was just I kind of wanted to try for my own identity kind of thing. And so, over time. But it's nice now to come back, although, a lot of those people aren't around anymore, which is why we do this kind of thing.
Right.
So.
Anything to add, Steven?
Well, yes, I have a lot to add to. Your question was how we would like our family's legacy to be remembered. And as I've stated, I didn't know much about my family until I was an adult and started getting into genealogy, but I always knew things that struck me, like I was gardener in a ranch for many years in the Napa Valley and spent a lot of time up in the hills, and there happened to be a Native American settlement out there. I'd go comb the vineyards. There were vineyards at the time, and I'd find things like this. And I always remember it just being like gold to me, being out hiking and finding a big, beautiful hawk feather or something. Those things were just magic to me. And like I said, I didn't find out until later that my granddaddy was part Indian. And it's no secret that the Indians were very close to the earth and nature and wildlife, giving thanks for their meals to the animals that they've killed and whatnot. And so I believe that CH's love and that sort of blood through his veins attracted him towards this veterinary sort of way of life, the love of animals, the love of caring for animals, that type of thing. It seems to me that it plays into that whole Native American blood connection. And so I would like the McElroy family legacy to be sort of the connection to the earth and the animals on a sort of a Native American level.
Yeah, and I can reflect that too, in that I really wanted to get that, not recognition, but the paperwork of the Native American. I had a letter that indicated that my grandfather had written that had his tribal number on it, which is very helpful when you have it. And so, I connected with Steve later and indicated that I had that information and had the form, which I finally found, that I used to get my card from the Bureau of Indian Affairs, and then connected with the Creeks, which is the tribe for the family. And so I have that, and I tease people that I'm a card-carrying Native American. There aren't a lot of them anymore, and first generation removed from people on the rolls, because grandfather was on the rolls, and you can see it when you go into the Dawes.
You can go right online and
find
see his signature.
So that kind of thing today is so rare. And I think the other thing, it's even rarer in Louisiana. I mean, they've got a couple of tribes, but it's like you're pretty much not there. And so, knowing and growing up, knowing about the civilized tribes, and of course that was part of Oklahoma history, and you had to take that course in junior high. So from that standpoint, I think it's important from my point of view, and it never really was something that Granddaddy talked about, although obviously he had that connection, and he knew it, and then you knew it when you went and saw his brother, as I said, in the Trading Post, and I'm sure he had stories. Max probably would have had great stories from that standpoint. Max was much older from me, and so I didn't really I wasn't privy to that information. I did and have taken up the Indian flute as part of my Indian heritage. So I have done that, and I'm now proud owner of 2 of those. They are not cheap, and I had one which was fairly large, and there was LSU has a leisure class process, and you can take courses that last like 6 weeks, 12 weeks, something like that. And they had one for Native American flutes. So I went, oh, good. So I enrolled. Well, one other person enrolled. Well, there wasn't enough to make the class. So I got a hold of the people who were out of the class, and I said, could you let me know who the person is? Because I had recently retired, so I had some time, and so I thought, oh, well, maybe I could take some private lessons. Well, it turned out the lady who was teaching the class lived 4 blocks away from me in my neighborhood. This just was meant to be.
Neat.
So, she owned 30 of them. When I walked in, she had all these flutes. I said, okay, and I have my measly little one. She said, well, I think you need to get one that's smaller for your hands. So she recommended that I get another one. So I did. Well, the guy who makes them, the one I got, lives in Dallas. And so I just got an email from him because they were going to be at some festival in Florida. So I wrote back and I said, I appreciate the fact that you keep me informed with going to this, but I said, I own 2 flutes, and that's probably one more than I ever thought I would own. And so she wrote back and she says, well, they're kind of like chocolate. Once you taste them, you want more. And I said, well, let's hope it doesn't turn into chocolate, because they, as I said, they're very expensive. And so it was like, okay, I'm not sure I'm going too far with this. And the other thing I did do with the Native American, I did as a treat for me, it was on my bucket list. I was in Washington, D.C. at the opening of the Native American Museum. And a friend of mine and I went up there. First of all, the number of Indians was just incredible. And all in native garb, although I was in jeans, but it was just so fascinating. And to be there on the grounds with all of these Native Americans just everywhere that day, it was just really impressive. And I have since gone back to the museum several times and am a charter member of that board. But so I really did try to get into those roots, and have continued to do that as much as I can. And I have a cypress tree in my backyard, and one of the things I just did, there was a guy I was having clear some land, and he had a saw. And I said, would you cut off one of these? He thought I wanted him to cut off all the cypress. Oh, no, just one. And I picked this one because I'm going to make a handle out of it. I own and you have to be a card-carrying Indian to do this. I own an eagle feather, which another Indian gave to me, and he found out through another person that I wanted one, and he gave it to me right before he died, actually. And so I have those, and then I had to find some other feathers to kind of expand this thing I want to make. So I was told turkey feathers are the best thing to use. So then I had to send out an email. Who's going turkey hunting anytime soon? I need some turkey feathers. So I got turkey feathers. So I have all the fixings for this. I just have to put it together. But that's one thing I want to do. And I have a shadow box that I'm going to put it in so that I can put it on display. So I think also, touching on what Steve says about the Native American, that's really important to me. And I appreciate going to the museum, and so that legacy is really important. And I've had some conversations with people at the museum about our relationship to the Creek Nation. I think, and we talked about this yesterday. Pleasant Porter, who was a chief, he was the last known chief of the tribe prior to treaties, which was in 1907, and based on what he told me yesterday, and my mother said, and I have a picture of him in full dress. We're cousins. So there's definitely a strong, relationship from that tribal sense in the McElroys. So I think that's the other legacy that's real important.
It's good that you still feel that connection.
Yeah.
Now y'all are here tonight for something special.
Yeah.
Could you tell us a little bit about the award?
Well, it's been given. This is the 60th year that the Dean McElroy Award has been given to the outstanding graduating senior class member for, I don't know, I guess, I don't know what the guidelines are on how they do it, but I think the class, it may be a combination of the class and the teachers decide on who gets it. It's a big deal. It's a surprise to the person. And I, last year, when I was here, kind of got this crazy idea of, so I emailed back here and said, when was this thing first started? So they told me, so I did a little math. I said, the 60th anniversary of this thing's coming up. What if you try to invite as many back as you can? Well, they brought it to some committee and thought that was a great idea. So that's why there's like 13 of them coming tonight for the awards. And this particular awards banquet, which is, as I said, an annual thing, has they give out 250 awards at the evening. And they do it very well because they do it every year. So it moves, even though you look at this horrendous list.
Scholarship.
It's amazing how fast they do, get it done. But they give, some of them are huge amounts. These people get $20,000. Some they get $500,000. Some they know about because they've had to fill out. They've had to
apply for them.
Not resumes. Like a story. What would you do, in your practice or that kind of stuff. Some because the kind of work they want to go into, they're going to go be veterinarians to birds or something. So there are special awards for that. So it's an interesting thing from my point of view to see the different kind of awards and the different, they're going to go into cats. Oh, okay. Or horses. Mm-hmm. And then it's always interesting to see who the person is. And what I have been doing for the past 4 or 5 years, even if I'm not here, it didn't really matter. If I'm here, I'm happy, I meet them. But then I get their address, their email address, and I email them later and say, if I haven't met them, then I say congratulations on an email. And I say, tell me a little bit about yourself. And so then they give me some more information about, how they got into vet med and what they want to do. And so I get these stories about, well, I'm going to go work with my dad who does horse veterinarian practice and that kind of stuff. So I really have enjoyed that. Now, in years past, they've always sent me a letter about 3 weeks before telling me who's going to get it.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't do that last year, and I think part of that was because of the transition between the deans.
Mm-hmm.
But I got the letter this year, so I know who it is. And
Well,
so
don't tell us.
Oh, I'm not going to tell you. So I kind of like that, to know. And if I happen to meet them, fine. But it's really kind of cool. And then to take the picture afterward, and then of course it gets in the Vetcetera
Mm-hmm.
magazine, which is always nice. And so I look forward to it from the standpoint I get a new outfit and find orange. And finding orange down in Louisiana is just a little hard, and a lot of times it's Tennessee orange. So I was looking for my new outfit, and so I took my OSU hat into one of the places, and I said, I need to match this hat. Okay. I need a new outfit. Okay. Can't be Tennessee orange, And so
A lot of yellow and black.
yeah, so we found it. So that's always a challenge every year if I'm coming.
Steven, is this your first banquet?
It's my first banquet. I actually tried to make the journey last year, again on my motorcycle, and that time of year there was a lot of storms rolling through, and I had a window that I thought I was going to be able to capitalize on. However, I forgot about all the snow that all the storms dumped on the mountain passes, so
He hit a dead end.
I
He hit
hit
a road closed.
road closed in Utah, and I was very disappointed to have to turn back and drive back home. So I vowed to come out here this year, and even if I had to fly, but I really wanted to ride. I was coming, and the weather has been really kind of dry this year, so all the roads were really nice. Had a great journey out here, and I'm compelled to do it as a way to honor my family and my ancestors. So.
Well, as we wind down here, is there anything else you'd like to add before we close on out? Any final remembrances of Dean McElroy?
Well, I will tell you that I started doing some research, which interestingly I found that I was in the wrong part of the years. I wanted to do an article for the alumni magazine on the forgotten president or the lost president. I couldn't decide what the title, working title, and do a little blurb on when Granddaddy actually functioned as an interim president of this university. Turned out it was back in 23. I thought it was much later during the President Bennett's era, but I was wrong. So I thought, I've been looking in the wrong spot. So I still would like to write the article, because the interesting thing was I had gone to to Old Central one day, and the lady who kind of stays over there and takes care of it, they have pictures up there of the presidents, and Granddaddy's picture's not up there. And Granddaddy used to have a room there. He lived there while he was in school. And for a room and board, he helped clean the building. And so she was telling me that it was unfortunate she couldn't add his picture because they don't see him as one of the presidents, because it was an interim thing. So I thought, I still think that might be a nice little short article, for either the paper or the magazine. So I'm still toying with that kind of thing, to do a little blurb on there.
I think so. I think that's a little bit of OSU history we really don't think about.
Yeah. Because it wasn't very long, and it was just for a purpose. And I think my concern was, were there others? And so I didn't really want to be exclusive to him, and not have some others. So that's why I haven't really gone any further on that, especially when I found out I was in the wrong year. Oops. So hopefully that'll get done.
Time to get to that.
Yeah, honey. One of my retirement bucket lists.
Add it to the list.
Yeah.
Well, we really appreciate your time today. Thank you so much for sitting down with us and recording some of your memories of your family.
You're welcome.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.